There's a certain element here of, wow, where to start? I mean, a huge amount of information from different directions as to what is being done, but also this, I think it was referred to as the, it's the water fountain of that gush of bad news and how you deal with it at the top. Mike, I would like to start with you, actually. So I think you've talked about moving to Australia as a trainer. Has the last 12 months made any difference to your thinking, even?
No, not really. It wasn't a horse issue, to be honest with you. But I really do believe that trainers at the end of the day are at the coalface. And I think regulators and everybody have got to work a lot closer with them. Because at the end of the day, owners are also guided by us, and we're the ones that deal with mostly where that horse goes from after training. And a lot of us are left with it, with the baby too. A horse will run badly on a Saturday and a Monday morning, an owner phones you and says, get rid of that horse, I'm not feeding it for another day. What do you do? Fortunately, I don't train for those type of people, but they are out there. And then you as a trainer have now got to find a home for this horse. And, sadly, very often the net result is euthanasia. And that's something that the biggest problem, I think, is the funding. I think we as owners and trainers and the racing industry have to address that, where we get the funding, to make sure that the last alternative isn't always euthanasia, that we can find them good homes, rehouse them properly and humanely. But I think the racing industry has to, if owners have got to race for 2 or 3% less, then so be it. That money's got to be diverted. At the end of the day, owners are losing money in racing anyway. So if they lose another 2 or 3%, what's the difference?
Well, that's one way of looking at it. I mean, the problem from outside, of course, is people don't care who's paying the bills. It's just your responsibility. And a failure to recognize that responsibility is what is bringing down the business.
I think at the end of the day, 99.9% of trainers are horse lovers and animal lovers. We get into the sport because we love the animal. Some people evolve to be very ruthless and will do anything to win a race. But at the end of the day, we are animal lovers, and we want to see horses treated humanely and, I'd love to see second career. I get a great kick out of, some of the horses I sell on to riding yards, and 2-3 years later, you see them winning show jumping events. That's fantastic. I was very impressed when I went to Australia for the Melbourne Cup the one year, that they had previous winners paraded at the racetrack. I mean, that is what public want to see. That's what the race goer these days and punter wants to see. I don't think everybody is ruthless, to be honest with you.
But can I just push you for one last point on trainers? I mean, it's very difficult. You can't generalize on these things necessarily, but I mean, how many trainers really are that bothered about where the horses go? You said trainers at 99.9% are horse lovers. Fine, they're lovers when they're there, but once they're there, there are blinkers on. They've gone. Not their problem.
Look, it is a problem. I mean, the sad reality is that many trainers, not all, are under financial pressure. So very often they're going to make silly decisions, and as you say, sometimes it's not in your face, so do you care? But I think that the key is, to all of this welfare issues, is the working with the trainer. The regulators being even harder on us. I'm for more regulation, to be honest with you. And I really love what I hear about coming out of Santa Anita. I mean, that's pretty impressive. But at the end of the day, we are at the coalface, and we need to work with the regulators. It's not a us and you scenario. It's a we in terms of the industry.
Jamie, Louis said right at the start, equine welfare has to be about cradle to grave. And joining all those dots up from cradle to grave is clearly a major challenge that you've got within the industry.
Oh, yeah, without doubt. And I think, we hear, and it's true, there's a phase of the horse's life in which it's regulated, whether it be pre-training through to its racing career and then up to its first exit out of racing. There's no regulation of the horse prior to racing there's stud book requirements for the horse to be, the foal to be named, and it has to be accessible for anti-doping measures. But other than that, there's no real regulation of the horse in its pre-racing career. And equally, it's very difficult to create a regulatory environment that encompasses horses 2 or 3 transfers down the line post-racing. So we need to become more creative and test ourselves. Pre-racing potentially could be quite simple. It could be something so simple as licensing breeders. That's not beyond the realms of possibility, and it's not difficult to achieve. Post-racing, I think you need to consider putting in place effective and attractive mechanisms, which means that people, even though they're not bound by the rules of racing and they're not obliged to comply with anything we tell them to do, but they'll want to, because there'll be incentives along the path for them to do so. And I think that way is the only way we'll ever be able to get as close as possible to having reliable data that we can hand on heart stand behind.
Tom, licensing of breeders, how could you see that working?
Look, I think, well, interestingly enough, in Australia already, 2 state governments have moved in that direction. So in Queensland, there was a recent report post the 730 program where a retired judge basically held a very short commission of inquiry, and one of his recommendations was licensing breeders. And similarly in WA, Western Australia, the government's made an announcement. There's not much detail there. I think really from the industry's point of view, we need to look at everything, that all of our practices, and how we can improve, also how we can give the public confidence. And if that's licensing in some way, then we need to consider that. I think it's really important though that the industry is driving that conversation. With the greatest respect to politicians or staffers in political offices, they don't know the industry as well as the industry knows itself. So it's really important that we're driving that, and that's one of the reasons why we launched the initiative we did 2 weeks ago.
I'm not sure if you're just hanging on the fence a little bit there. Would you see it as a positive, smart move? Yeah, no,
I think we've got to look at. So I guess potentially yes, but you've got to see what that looks like, don't you? And I think, as I say, it's really important that the breeders are driving that. And actually, the people who I speak to who are the strongest on this issue are probably the bigger commercial breeders, because they see the negativity in the industry as something that really affects their, there's a strong business case for putting in place any mechanism that's going to improve confidence.
Because there is that problem, isn't there? It's not racing's responsibility at the moment to engage you quite, but it's entirely their problem.
Yeah, and we said straight away after that program went to air, we need to look at everything we do, and we need to look at whether 14,000 foals is the right number to be producing every year. So I think there's an acceptance that you've got to look at these problems holistically. You've got to look at all aspects of the industry, but we've got to put our hand up and say, we're going to take part in that debate, and we're going to ask some honest questions of ourselves. And again, just with the initiative we announced, we've put 4 people on there who are independent of the industry, 4 people who we've got respect for, 4 people who I think bring good insight from other areas, bring a really good skill set. So it's up to us to sort of engage with them, have confidence, and we want them to give us a bit of an assessment, and I think that will shape the discussion around breeding and what regulation needs to occur.
One thing that struck me through the course of listening to you all, and within the back of my head, Louis obviously wanting to talk and to build a sense of how you can harmonise positions in a field like equine welfare. What was it, 30 different jurisdictions you talked about, Kristen, in the US? I mean, it is just, and that's just the US, yeah. Looking across the piece, this is an incredibly complex and diverse sort of approach to some of the equine welfare issues. And I'm just going to pick up on one of the questions which you kindly have thrown out here, and it is, whilst respecting the independent pitch of the newly established Australian Welfare Task Force, there is a need to address the level of duplicative effort across state jurisdictions. Multiple task forces beg the question for national leadership. Jamie, it's an Australian directed point, but clearly one of the biggest problems.
I think, you know, that's a very good question. I think, you know, I said in my presentation, there's variation from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, state to state. People are taking different approaches. So I think, you know, provided people are doing good work towards trying to bring about better welfare outcomes for horses, it's very hard to take a contrary view. But clearly it would be better if there's in my mind, if there is a collected approach where people are all driving through a central source to deliver the best outcomes. But then that's further complicated by considering the financial resources of the various states. So it may be easy for New South Wales or Victoria to say, this is the plan, this is what we should be doing. But it may not be possible for some of the other states to implement them. So I think we need assistance from Racing Australia in areas such as the stud book, looking at the rules for eligibility and maintaining your position within the stud book. We need to think about potential funding mechanisms. I mean, America's TAA it's a fantastic setup, the way it's all funded and works. So we need to consider all those matters. I do fear that if you get too many splinter groups, you'll get a less effective outcome.
I wonder, Kristen, might be something you could help to look at as well then. How far could any real harmonisation of equine welfare rules go, do you think? It's something I'd like to ask all of you, in fact, because there are so many different jurisdictions. We don't have, obviously, a lot of countries up here represented who would have significantly different cultural attitudes even to what equine welfare actually means. So I just wonder how far. Louis, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, well, certainly, because it's part of the duty, the main part of the duty of the Federation. I think one of the biggest challenge we had was the problem of thoroughbred care for medication, substances, because we were improving on a permanent basis our reference labs, and the sensitivity has increased. I asked my director of lab, and he told me since the 70s it has increased by 1 million times. So while we still must be testing in order to detect the prohibited substances, we have to find how to take the best care of the horse with the medication control. And we created the international screening limits, which are applied in all the labs who test racing in the world, and which gives the possibility for the trainer, when a horse has a problem, to receive medication, proper medication, declared by the vet and registered also and controlled on a permanent basis. And this means that now the welfare of the horse is made much easier because the vets, we give also the times for the vets for elimination. In the old time, the racing authority was saying, no, it's not our job, it's the job of the lad manufacturer. I've made a lot of testing on different products, and we were able to give recommendations to the vets of what they should use, how they could use. So I think you can do it, but it's a long road. It's a difficult one. Another example is the whip issue. Maybe you will come later on. But I think we now give the possibility to take care of the horse welfare for the treatment by medications through all the life. And it's nearly harmonized around the world, I would say. There is small differences, but globally, it's harmonized. Right.
Dion, would you say that the sort of the international perspective on medication has informed the debate in the United States, and Lasix is obviously the sort of key area at the moment?
Yeah, so really that cuts two ways in the United States. You have kind of a sentiment of Americanism among some, and you have a sentiment of others who want to be more global and want to compete on a more global stage. So that is really the division that we are fighting, is those who think, we don't need to worry about what other people are doing, we are America, and those that say we want our horses to be competing on the same stage. We've done that with some of our individual races at the Stronach Group, particularly the Pegasus and some of the highlighted races, is we are going towards a more international standard more quickly than the rest of the United States will likely catch up.
Okay, and Kristen, if I could just pull it back to what I was saying about that sense of harmonization, because it seems like you've got the biggest challenge of all in terms of jurisdictions to deal with, and a lot of what you can put forward is very much voluntary as opposed to compulsory.
I think there's a variety of experiences that we've had, but certainly it's a lot of advocacy trying to get racing commissions, racetracks to understand and accept the recommendations that are being made. So we have we touched on medication a little bit, just to touch on a few other safety-related initiatives. Pre-race examinations, 15 years ago, I'm sure Dion can tell you, they were not being done the same way. Some tracks weren't doing them at all. We are almost universal now, I think, in tracks that are doing them, or at least doing them the same way. They're using the same software. Some of them call things differently or treat things differently, but we've certainly made progress in that area. The equine injury database is one example I think I can point to as where voluntary does work. We have 99% of racetracks participating in the EID. Virtually every large racetrack in the United States participates. We have a few small racetracks that are not, but that's all voluntary. But that did take a lot of phone calls and explaining, and here's what it is, and here's what it does, and here's what it doesn't do, and here's the tools available to you. So it can be done. It just takes a lot of grassroots efforts. Some of it's regulatory, some of it's at the racetrack, some of it's both. So you just have to know the framework, but certainly not easy. It's not just passing a rule and then going on. So.
And then, Mike, on the broader international front, I mean, you're out and about in various parts of the world, having to adjust to different regulatory systems and the way in which people do and don't view equine welfare. Can you see a route to a harmonized, common sort of platform of regulation and understanding?
I think it has to go that way. We certainly, as trainers, would prefer that as well. Jumping from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, you could find yourself foul of the law because what you were doing in one jurisdiction wasn't happening in another. I mean, just a very small example. Many years ago, I'd also raced in Dubai, raced in South Africa with a certain bit that in Dubai was actually not allowed. And it was eventually allowed, and the same thing with Australia. But I mean, I put this bit on the horse in Dubai thinking, well, it'll be okay. And the next thing, the steward said, that's not allowed. So, just small things like that make our lives easier for sure.
Okay, thank you very much.
Harmonizing the rules.
I've got another question here, which is actually specifically for you, Dion. Private vets examining horses pre-work. Are the private vets now charging the owners, the trainers, for that pre-work exams? And there is another direct question to that, which is who funds the vets in their pre-race inspections?
So the pre-race inspections are done by the private veterinarians and the association veterinarians. So there are two different vets that are looking at horses. The private veterinarians are funded by the owners. There's a nominal fee. It's $15 that most of the vets are charging for a lameness exam. If you went to a private clinic, it would be $150. So it's a very small fee. It allows them to make a medical record, do all the things they need to do. It allows them to claim it under their professional liability insurance. So for the vets, it's very important for them to charge. We get very little pushback from the trainers and the others in that. And by doing that, a lot of what they're doing is reducing the medication the horses get because the vets have a better idea of what the horse needs. So it's a trading of paying for medication versus paying for services. Now, if you're talking about the association vets, they also do a pre-race and in most cases a pre-work exam. And for those, the Stronach Group pays those veterinarians to do it. And just to give you an idea of the breadth of what we've done, we have about 1,600 horses at the backside of Santa Anita. The last time I checked, we had examined over 1,500 horses for works at least one time. So we are definitely covering the watershed as far as horses on our grounds.
So as far as Stronach, for example, goes, it absorbs some of those costs?
Yes, we pay the vets for their time. They go out and examine horses. They don't pay us per exam, or they don't charge us per exam. We have full-time and part-time veterinarians who work for us.
Okay, thank you. I just want to pick up on another question there. As I said, cradle to grave. Let's look at the later time of life, if you like, for racehorses. How do regulators monitor the whereabouts and the well-being of retired horses? When does the commitment of the regulator cease, if ever, especially when control is in the hands of the owners? So, Jamie, commitment is actually a really interesting word, isn't it? There is sort of legal responsibility, and I think what we've seen over the course of the last 12 months is a recognition there needs to be a greater commitment, but perhaps you could address that question.
Yeah, well, I think the first part of the question is very straightforward. The law of the land controls the horse post its first exit from racing, strictly speaking. But the use of the word commitment is good because that's a completely different subject. And we've always spoken and tried to divest ourselves of any responsibility for the horse beyond that first transfer from racing. But I think recent events have shown that that's not acceptable and can't be the position going forward. Who controls it? It's always going to remain in the control of whoever has possession of the horse or ownership of the horse at the relevant time. But I think racing needs to be able to satisfy itself firstly in order to satisfy others that they have an awareness or a knowledge of where horses are, what they're being subjected to, and when they reach an end-of-life experience, no matter where that be. And so we can't just totally walk away, throw our hands in the air and say, that's it, they're outside racing, we now no longer have any responsibility, because everyone still refers to them as a racehorse. And when you see a 7:30 report moment, like a lot of those horses, the majority of those horses had all been retired for the few that were thoroughbreds, they'd been retired for some time. But they were still fairly and squarely nailed as racehorses.
And it doesn't help when you've got, I think they're called kill buyers, aren't they? The ones who buy up these horses and take them to slaughter. I saw one of them saying, well, you never see an eventing horse here. You never see a horse from a family farm. They're all racehorses.
Yeah,
I mean,
well,
that's the sting,
position,
isn't it?
But that's the position racing was in some time ago, and that's just head in the sand sort of thing. We know from what we see at the livestock sales, the minority of the horses are thoroughbreds, but there is a very representative cross-section of all breeds, and for anyone to say that a particular breed of horse or a horse from a particular discipline cannot and does not end up in those sort of scenarios is just crazy.
Well, and our horses have brands and tattoos, so they can be very easily picked out of a crowd of hundreds of other horses that include ponies, eventing horses, show horses, and everything. But because of the outside or exterior identification that's available, I feel like, at least in the United States, we get called out for that specific reason.
Sorry, I don't quite understand that. Were you saying that the branding makes it easier to tell, you can see it, as we saw indeed for
and with the tattoos, they can flip a lip and say, oh, it's a thoroughbred, but it's standing amongst 50 unidentifiable bay horses, but this one's got a lip tattoo, so it's the racing industry is to blame. No matter where the horse came from or how long it's been retired, it's still a racing industry. It's still a racehorse.
So there's a flip side to that, though, too, because we also have them branded, but what we've found more recently, other breeds, other associations, equestrian associations, are also branding their horses with freeze brands, the same sort of thing. So when you actually see a 50 horses standing there all branded, everyone is taking the view that they're 50 thoroughbreds, when in fact there may be 5 thoroughbreds and 45 other breeds. So, you know, it isn't straightforward, but it is naive for people to think that their horses could not potentially end up in that scenario.
Yeah, and Kristen, there's a question here directly for you. Do you think the ban on the domestic slaughter of horses in the US has made the aftercare of racehorses actually more difficult?
Well, the Jockey Club feels like every thoroughbred should be rehomed. They shouldn't be going to slaughter. So we don't exactly know the number that is going to slaughter. The U.S. Department of Agriculture does not keep statistics by breed. So we don't have any way to know, okay, the number that we are missing on our aftercare programs is X. However, I think our goal, much like with Dion mentioned that the goal for fatalities at the racetrack is 0, our goal for thoroughbreds going to slaughter is 0 as well. And we continue to try to find programs and aftercare organizations that can move in that direction.
Is that realistic, though? I mean, Jamie said earlier, unfortunately, fact is some horses can't necessarily be rehomed, retrained, and euthanasia may be the right option.
Absolutely, and we're fortunate in the United States. We do have some large landowners that can turn horses out, and they are essentially just sanctuary horses for the rest of their life. Ones that have behavioral issues or chronic unsoundness, euthanasia might be the best option, and that certainly is something that we consider when we're reviewing aftercare applications for the TAA, is every organization has to have a euthanasia policy. For the most part, those deal with health issues. However, if an organization gets a horse that has behavioral issues that make the horse dangerous or not otherwise able to live comfortably, then that would be another option for when they would euthanize the horse.
As we're now on euthanasia, Jamie, there is also a big issue, and it's another public opinion battle to be fought, I think, about the euthanizing of racehorses at the track if they're hurt at the track, taken off the track for the sake of numbers and what it looks like in sort of public statistics of how many die at a racecourse. There's no sense of uniformity there either. Could there be?
Oh, again, yes. And I mean, you know, this is the way we've got to approach things. People have got to stop saying we can't do things, and they've got to look at how we can do it. I think from my understanding, the complexity regarding race day fatality statistics is the different criteria which creates a race day fatality. So I'm aware in some jurisdictions, if a horse is removed from the race course, and I mean by that I mean the stable yard, the tie-up stalls, he's taken to a nearby veterinary hospital clinic and he's euthanized there, he's not recorded as a race day fatality. In Victoria, our metric is 48 hours. Any horse which is euthanized as a result of an injury sustained in a race that is euthanized within 48 hours is classified as a race day fatality. I'm not saying that's the right metric by any means, but that's to help racing. If every jurisdiction were able to create a uniform set of recording statistics, that would enable fair comparison country to country, because we hear where, you know, different fatality rates in different countries, and sometimes we might be being terribly unfair on some countries because of the manner in which they keep their statistics. So for good comparison, which would help inform work on track surfaces and the like, Dion, yes, we certainly should consider pushing towards a standard set of criteria.
Dion.
We actually do 72 hours. And it really takes work. I mean, we've had situations at Santa Anita where we've had a horse that suffered an injury and the trainer wanted to take it off the property to a farm to rehabilitate. Well, it was not the kind of injury from what we believed to be the kind that was amenable to that. So you really have to chase down. I was calling, then they decided to take it to a veterinary clinic. I was calling that veterinary clinic. I was saying, you know, if this is just an attempt to euthanize a horse off of our property so we can't see it, that's not okay. If they really want diagnostics, we're fine with that. Do all the diagnostics you want, but you need to let us know what happened. Unfortunately, the horse ended up being euthanized, but we added it to our statistics, even though it happened off our grounds, because without having a good baseline of what is happening, you can't improve.
Yeah.
We also include sudden deaths, and some countries don't include sudden deaths. And the one thing with the Equine Injury Database is we collect what's called a triage score, and that's a rating from 0 to 5 that ranks the severity of the injury, the 5s being the worst musculoskeletal injuries. So the one thing we can also look at when we're doing research is just severe injuries, whether or not the horse did result in a fatality or not. We can still look at those injuries as a risk factor as well, because we obviously want to prevent injuries regardless of whether they...
Yeah, quite. Tom, I want to bring you in. We're looking at challenges, clearly. We're hoping we can come up with some sense of solutions. I'm bringing this question in partly because I think it's an expression of this is an emotive issue, and this is a difficult issue, but it's a question specifically for you. It's not the most polite question I've ever read out. Well done on forming yet another industry body, but I'd like to know what your constituency is proposing in terms of an oversupply of thoroughbreds in Australia, a commercial conundrum bordering on avarice. I mean, it's a pretty direct question.
Sure.
I hope you don't mind me putting it in those terms, but it's come from the floor.
Yeah, no, glad to take it. Firstly, I suppose the accusation of overproduction. So we've got 14,000 foals. You know, again, we said right from the start, we need to look at whether that number's right, and that's probably not just a question for breeders saying, you know, is 14,000 the right number, but it's a question for the racing industry as well. You know, as we mentioned earlier, we've got 3,000 race meetings across Australia, almost 20,000 races a year. You know, what do we need? Is that the right number of races or not? So, you know,
it was 18,000 not so very long ago as well, wasn't it?
I think so, yeah. And look, I should say the foal crop has actually decreased about 30% in the last 15 years or so. So the numbers have gone down. You know, the conversations we've had at board level have been very frank about, you know, what is the right number. But also, I think just looking at it in terms of, you know, number is one metric, but probably more important is, you know, is everyone who is in that stud book, who's registering a foal, are they committed to racing? Are they breeding even with the intention of racing? So, you know, we've got a farm in New South Wales that breeds over 150 horses a year without any intention of racing those. They're bred basically on colour and then sold on to people who want a thoroughbred. So, you know, to understand that data better, you know, we've got 14,000 born, less than 5,000 will go for a yearling sale. So, you know, I think, you know, and we've already started doing this, is trying to look really probably right through the foal crop, particularly at the tail of the foal crop, because I think one thing that certainly concerns, I think one area of concern is horses that essentially are bred perhaps with no intention of racing, with little commercial value. You know, the horse that is unable, because of its breeding, to get into a yearling sale, you know, whoever owns that horse is going to have to invest a lot more money in it to realise any value, because they're going to have to race it. So it's going to have to go into training, and you know, training's, you know, not cheap in Australia, as it, you know, isn't anywhere else. So I think there's a willingness to look at all of those things, but it's, you know, just distilling it down to 14,000, is that the right number or not? It's probably a broader question than that.
Okay, thank you very much. Mike, I've got a question here directly for you as well, which I think you touched on a little bit, but how does the different welfare regulation within different countries, how does that impact on a trainer's ability to best train your horses? The example given here is grey in across 5 different countries. So how much does it affect the way in which you look to train the horses when you've got different regulations to work to?
Well, I mean, it's not something that affects many trainers. Certainly if you travel a lot, it does. You know, so, you know, I think one worries more about the regulation in your own country where your home base will be. And as I said earlier, I'm all for more regulation. I'm more for trainers working with, not against the regulators, because it is all of our problems. But I'm also, Mr. Steer touched on it earlier, about regulation from cradle to grave. You know, the way, very often there are horses that, it doesn't matter what discipline they're in, the way they've been raised, filled full of carbohydrates and don't even know what their legs are for, growing up in little paddocks the size of your bedroom. And unfortunately, the second home option for them virtually doesn't exist. So, you know, it's something that I think should be regulated right through, right to the end. I firmly believe jockey clubs should have welfare officers, that it's funded by the industry, and they're on top of this all the time.
Louis.
I think there is one important point which has been mentioned by several speakers, and on which we must all work, is education. It's very clear that when you have some trainers who start their life using medication, it's very difficult after to convince them that a racehorse should run under when he's ready to run and in good health without medication. And I think more and more countries now have examinations where they have special courses in order to educate the professionals, and whether it's done by the breeders, within the Breeders Association, it's a good way, I think, to improve the situation. And there is change. If you look at the next big race in the world, now the richest race in the world, when it was created, we were all frightened that it would be under medication again, because most of the races in Saudi Arabia are run under medication. But fortunately, we found out that they decided to follow the Group 1 rules that we want to apply in all of the world, and the Saudi Cup will be run without medication. And also the Stronach Group has given the same example as having no rest day medication in some of their big races. I think it's moving.
Education is obviously key. Education within the movement of racing is vital, but Tom, you referred to getting on the front foot about telling the rest of the world about these sorts of things, and you are still so much on the back foot. How do you turn that around? One piece in the Sydney Morning Herald is helpful, sure, but it's not turning around an avalanche, is it?
That's right, and I think there has to be a sort of change in perception from the regulators and from the industry. I think probably social media has changed everything. In the last, really it's the last eight years or so. I think for some people in the sport, as in other industries, they probably thought it's best not to talk about welfare. If we do that, we're just giving more oxygen to activists or to those who are critical of the industry. And in a way, that sort of position was, I guess, tenable in the sense that, to get wide, to get a story about animal welfare or critical of animal welfare out to the broad public, you would need someone sitting in an office at the Sydney Morning Herald or at the BBC to decide that that was a news story. And that didn't happen very often. Whereas now, with social media, it's not a case of, they have all the oxygen they need. After 7:30, saying nut to the cup was trending on social media. So I think as an industry, we need to look at how we can better explain what we're doing, the initiatives that we have in place, and be really transparent about that. I think that's very important. And look at how we can explain what we're doing, and also, pushing those good stories out there about the industry too.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We're pretty much up on time. I need to apologise to one or two who put questions out there that I haven't got round to, but I know that there will be an opportunity to talk to our panellists in any case. Louis, I'd like to leave the last couple of minutes to you for a summary, really, a synthesis of what you think the next step should be.
I think a lot is happening, and clearly horse welfare has become a high priority. It is the #1 priority for our federation, but there is still a lot of work to do. Especially, we must be proactive, and the Aftercare organization, like IFAR, are doing a great job, and we have to support them as much as we can, all the industry. We must be proactive, and we must also better communicate. It's clear that a lot can be done on the communication side.
Okay, Louis, thank you very much for those comments. Ladies and gentlemen, our panel.